Hey everybody, welcome back to Dagish America Presents. I'm your host, Ben Harrell, and we're continuing our journey through Season 6, where we've been talking all about leadership in the fumigation industry. So far, we've discussed leading with safety, managing your time, and building high-performing teams. But there's another key part of leadership we haven't tackled yet: mentorship. In this episode, we're diving into what it means to help someone grow from being a skilled technician to becoming a confident and capable leader. The truth is, this industry thrives when we invest in people. We've all seen promising employees who have the potential to lead. But without guidance, training, and encouragement, that potential doesn't always translate into success. So today, we're going to explore how experienced professionals can mentor the next generation. From providing clear career paths to teaching leadership communication and fostering confidence, we'll talk about how great leaders build other great leaders. Joining me is Doug Knudsen, Senior Director of Operations at Plunkett's Pest Control. Doug has mentored countless technicians as they've grown into leadership roles, and he knows firsthand what it takes to support someone on that journey. So please help me welcome Doug to the podcast. Doug, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing good today, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing terrific, trying to beat the heat.
Yes, plenty of heat out there.
Yeah, it's been a particularly warm summer this year, that's for sure. So, like I said, I want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast. This is your first time on the podcast. So what I usually do with first timers is I always try to give them an opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about themselves. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Doug Knudsen. I work at Plunkett's Pest Control. My current role there is a Senior Director of Operations for Plunkett's. I've been with the company now for 33 years and several different roles over that time frame. I started in the field way back in 1992 as a service route technician, worked my way into a branch supervisor role, then into a regional manager position for several years. I spent about 7 years in our corporate office in Fridley, Minnesota, managing our technical and training team. And now, as of last year, I've kind of made the full circle back into operations as a senior director.
Man, that's terrific. So I'm definitely talking to the right person then when it comes to mentoring leaders, because it sounds like, much like myself, you kind of started at that bottom rung of the ladder and worked your way up into a leadership position. So who better to talk to than people who have actually done that? So that's good.
Yeah, well, they say the best teacher is often experience, right? And I've had the chance to have a lot of time invested to gain a lot of experience, and I've made probably every mistake you could make along the way and was able to learn from some of that. So a chance to work with a lot of different people over the years and a lot of different personalities. So yeah, you do learn from all those experiences for sure.
Yeah, and learning from mistakes is pretty common. I think it's something that we all do. So as I said earlier in the podcast, today we're going to be talking about, kind of mentoring people into leadership or management roles. And so I just kind of wanted to pick your brain today on that topic. And I'll just start right out of the gate. What kind of signs do you look for? Like if you're looking at a technician that's been working for you for, however many months or years, when you look at that technician, what do you look for in them that suggests that they're ready or maybe almost ready for that next step up the ladder?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to answer, but my answer probably would be maybe less than what you might expect. I think what I tend to look for is character traits rather than skill sets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're looking for somebody with high integrity, people that are honest and hardworking, and I think committed to the craft, right? We train a lot of new people over the course of a year, and some people are looking for a job and they want a paycheck, and that's all well and good because you need people like that as part of your organization as well. But I think the leaders really need to be committed to the task, right? Committed to the organization, committed to the industry. They really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then I think the other piece to that is that willingness to grow and develop themselves. And I think people that are successful with that also have a fair amount of humility, meaning they don't think they know it all. They're willing to learn. They're willing to ask questions of others that might know more than they do. And so I think for me, those are some of the key character traits that I look for, I guess.
Yeah, you really just keyed right in on it. A lot of what we do, the technical aspects of what we do in our day-to-day operations, in my opinion, I think a lot of that stuff can be taught to just about anybody. I mean, it's technical, but there's a lot of instructions, there's a lot of directions that are involved with it, and you can teach a lot of people how to do that. But when you start talking about leadership and management, looking for those particular character traits, like what you mentioned, people who are passionate, people who are open-minded, people who are willing to learn. And again, like you said earlier, learning from the mistakes, admitting the mistakes, learning from the mistakes. And those are the kinds of individuals I think that make the best type of leaders or managers.
And I also think that, leadership is a bit of a misnomer, because I think oftentimes you think about leadership and management level leadership, but in all reality, I mean, you can lead from anywhere in your organization and at any level of your organization. And people that recognize that, I think, have a big advantage over others in that regard, simply because they understand that, you don't have to have the title to be a leader in anything that you do.
Boy, you really hit on something there, and I'm glad you said it the way that you did, because I mean, you're correct. You don't have to have the title to be a leader. I mean, there's so many times, not just in our industry, but just in day-to-day life, where you see people step up into a role of responsibility or leadership, and that organization just kind of happens naturally. So being able to pinpoint and see the people that have that natural talent and that natural ability is one thing, but then also seeing people who want to learn that talent and that ability also kind of plays a part as well. Because even if somebody's not necessarily naturally a leader, in my opinion, they can oftentimes, if they have the desire, can learn those leadership traits. So I think you have natural leaders, and then you also have people who can be taught leadership traits and management traits, but they have to be open and willing to do that. And you have to have that humility. I think you were kind of, you alluded to that earlier. You have to have some of that humility in order to do that too. And I also think that it's really important to remember, as leaders and as managers, yes, you're leading the people, you're managing the people, but in my opinion, I think the most important task that we have as managers is supporting the people that report to you rather than the other way around. And I think sometimes people kind of get that a little bit confused.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly the biggest mistake new leaders, when you're promoted into that new role. That's probably one of the bigger mistakes that individuals make. I know I did when I took my first leadership role, and I experienced that with several others as I was guiding them and promoting them into a leadership role. And it is that there's this perception that now that you are the leader, whether it's a supervisor or a manager or anything else, you are to know everything and do everything and be responsible for everything. And it's simply not the case. And what I find is the people that really focus on that get exhausted really fast. But maybe it's part of the process as well. I think that you try to be everything for everybody, when really your job is to develop the individuals to help themselves and be there for that support and kind of that backstop, bit of a security blanket for them. But what I found is that if you continually try to solve problems for others, they will continually ask you to solve their problems.
Yes, you are absolutely spot on there. As a matter of fact, one of my old bosses, this has been several years ago. I mean, wonderful person, wonderful individual, just a wealth of knowledge. And I got very used to going to them with every little single question that I had related to our industry. And then finally one day, this boss sat me down in a nice way, sat me down and said, "Hey, look, I'm not going to answer these questions for you anymore. Do I know the answers to these questions? Yes, I do. But I'm robbing you of the ability to do your own research. If you know you can come to me for the answer, you're not learning how to research for the answer yourself. So I don't want to be that crutch for you anymore. I want to, I'll still answer the question for you, but I want you to exhaust all of your other avenues first and then come to me. That way you can learn how to research. And I'll help you learn how to research for the answers yourself if that's what you want, but I don't want to give you the answer anymore." And wow, was that valuable advice and valuable mentorship that I very much took to heart from that particular boss.
Yeah, we had a similar experience, although your sounds a little bit more cordial than the experience I had with my boss, but it was very similar. And I asked a question that I easily had the information to in our reference manual. And when I was asked about that, well, what does our reference manual say about that? And I said, well, I don't have time to look at that. That's why I called you. And basically my boss said, well, when you read what it says, give me a call, and then hung up the phone,
Yeah.
right? Had he not done that, I might have still been calling
Yeah,
for
exactly.
questions.
So, I was very thankful that I learned that lesson because it helped me develop my own ability to do research. And then I also have had the opportunity to be on the other end of that and kind of use that tactic for people that I've
Yeah.
been helping to mentor as well. So, again, I think we learn and we adopt the traits that we're taught from the mentors that helped us, and we kind of pass them down. So it's kind of a pay it forward situation when it comes to mentorship.
Yeah, it is interesting too when you talk about being a mentor. There, I think everybody, if we sat and think about it, you can recognize a mentor from somewhere, whether it be your parents potentially, or maybe you're one of your first mentors. But then you think about your school days and maybe possibly a teacher or a sports coach or somebody that took an interest in you and kind of mentored you along the way. And sometimes we take those people for granted, but we were learning things all the while. And then at some point, when you progress through your career and you get to a point where you suddenly realize it happens kind of without realizing it happening, but you look around and now you are the mentor in the room for somebody else, right? And that's a big turning point, I think, for individuals when it comes to leadership, is recognizing that. I heard a quote from somebody, I can't remember where it was, but they were talking about giving advice to their younger self in our industry. And what they said was find a mentor and then become a mentor. And had they done that earlier, they felt they would have had a lot more success and an easier path.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how natural and unconscious it is when you have the opportunity to kind of maybe pass down some really key knowledge that you've learned, being able to pass that down to others. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks to themselves, hey, what can I do to be a good mentor today? Or at least I don't. I don't wake up in the morning and think that. Now, I do find myself wake up in the morning a lot and thinking, what can I do to help somebody? But I don't frame it in that mentorship kind of mindset, even though at the end of the day, when you're reflecting back, maybe you can look at it and be like, well, that was kind of mentorship. So I did want to ask you, talking about mentorship, obviously mentorship is extraordinarily important for our industry, and not just for our industry, for all industries. And I know that learning on the job is part of it. Sometimes you have to let people kind of learn on their own and figure things out on their own. Heck, we're just talking about that. But I also think that having some formal mentorship approach is also important. Maybe not calling it mentorship, but some kind of formal approach to teaching people how to become leaders, I think, is really important as well. So how important is it for you to have that formal approach to cultivating and turning people from just technicians, say, into managers or leaders?
I think it can be vitally important. Unfortunately, I think that there's not a lot of good resources out there to take advantage of. And I can't speak for others in our industry, but I think oftentimes, you are recognized, for example, as being a good route technician or a good employee and having strong skills of doing independent work, and then recognized as someone that potentially would be the next level type of position. And oftentimes you end up with a name change or a title change, but no instruction manual to come with it. And that makes it difficult. And so is it important? Yes. But at the same time, it's tough to teach soft skills like that. You're dealing with people and personalities, and it's just so varied in how people react to different things and how to interact with individuals. I think experience is the best teacher in that regard. But at the same time, I think understanding what the role is as important as anything. We touched on it a minute ago in terms of, you start off with trying to be everything to everybody and having all the answers and having to be responsible for all the decisions that were made. And the biggest thing you can do is to help people help themselves. But then you throw in all of the different personalities that you may deal with, especially in pest control, work very independently a lot of the time, right? So the only one you have to be accountable to most parts of the day is yourself. And one of the things that I noticed immediately was that not everybody did things the same way that I did them. And, it probably sounds a little arrogant, but I just was so surprised at that not everybody was doing the things that I was doing. And so I had a pretty rough go of it in the beginning simply because I was trying to project my ways of doing things onto others as the only way that it could be done. And that created a little bit of personality conflict at that time, if you will. And realizing that there are other ways to do the exact same thing and sometimes even get better results. That's where that humility piece I think comes in. But it took a little bit of time to learn personalities, and that's the one thing that I really focused in on when you talk about training, is the importance of learning individuals' personalities, what makes them tick, what drives them, what motivates them, how do they react to, whether it be discipline or praise or whatever it might be. And to me, that's one of the bigger, probably unspoken aspects of leadership. We focus a lot on the technical side of things and being an expert in the field, and that's important. But knowing your people and seeking out resources to better your skills or knowledge in that arena, I think is as important as anything.
But yeah, you're spot on, Doug. And I think that not all of us can really have like a formal mentorship or leadership approach. I think that it's really difficult talking about those soft skills to be able to like put them down on a piece of paper and say, this is how I'm going to train or mentor everybody. And it's always going to be the same. It's going to be the exact same approach. It's going to be the exact same tools that I use. It's really difficult to do because, like you said, we are working with such a wide variety of personality types. So everybody needs to be mentored and taught and trained kind of in a little bit of different way. Some people, they need a lot more support. Some people, it's better to leave them on their own a little bit more with them knowing that you're there if they need you, but let them kind of be on their own a little bit. So all of these different personality types take a different approach. So to sit down and like have a formal approach to that, in my opinion, I think it's really tough. At least one that is like by the book and is static and can't change.
I agree. And I think it goes back to that idea of finding a mentor yourself. Find somebody that you trust, that you respect, and pay attention to what they do. Pay attention to how they approach things. And, not everything they do is going to maybe have the greatest results, but pay attention to that as well, right? Take away the good things that they present and don't duplicate or replicate the things that have negative impacts. I think that's probably the biggest teacher of all, and where you'll gain the most traction and gain the most ground in your development.
And that's great advice because, of course, nobody's perfect. So people that you look up to, they're going to make mistakes, just like you'll make mistakes. And maybe people, if you're lucky, that look up to you will see maybe you make mistakes. So watch how your mentors or the people that you look up to, watch how they react to the mistakes that they make. And that is such a great learning opportunity because most of the time you'll see them react in a way that is very positive, especially if they're a good mentor. You're going to see them react to their own mistakes in a positive way, whether they learn from them, whether they adapt to them, whatever the case is. And then also, I think it's good to watch them be able to react to other people's mistakes, not just yours, but other people's mistakes. How do they train other people as well? Or how do they offer advice or leadership to other people as well? So there's so many different ways that you can garner knowledge from those people that you look up to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest hurdles? I mean, I'm sure you've trained a whole bunch of technicians or people at that beginning stage of their career in the pest control industry. What are some of the biggest hurdles that you've faced when you're trying to help these people transition from a technician into some type of a management or leadership role?
We call it the transformation from being a super doer to a supervisor.
I like that. I like that.
Some people really struggle with that whole transformation. I mentioned it a bit earlier, trying to do everything for everybody and feeling that you're responsible for everything when you simply can't. And you're lucky if you just burn out and get tired of doing it and realize that it can't go on that way anymore. Some people just grind themselves into the ground. And what I find is that they become disenchanted with the job because they're trying to do too much. So the biggest hurdle, I think, is just that transformation, accepting the idea or understanding that you can't be the super doer, and there's a difference between that and a supervisor. And I think what we just touched on as well is not taking the time to get to know the individuals that they're supervising. Understanding what makes people go is as important as anything. And you never, no two people are the same. You always want to treat people fair, but you rarely treat them the same.
Yeah.
And that's something, a phrase that I learned somewhere and it really stuck with me because, I want to be fair to everybody and treat them with respect, but it's rarely that I do it in the same way with individuals. So, when it comes to, let's take, for example, a situation where there's you need to reprimand somebody. Sometimes just a statement of, hey, your work really wasn't that good today, is enough for them to just be completely crushed and want to improve upon what they're doing. Others would take the same phrase and be challenged by that and then give you a half a dozen excuses as to why they couldn't accomplish what they were supposed to accomplish. So learning that about the individuals and taking that time, because it has to be intentional time given to that to really learn how people tick. And then I think when you talk about big hurdles is understanding that people, whether they admit to it or not, people really want to be held accountable. And I know some people would be shaking their heads at that, but that's been my experience is that the best employees you will ever have, they really embrace expectations. They want to know what the boundaries are. They want to know what's expected of them because oftentimes the good ones will at least achieve that or more likely try to exceed your expectations. And conversely, the people that you don't want working for you, they want to run away from expectations.
Yeah.
They don't want anything to do with them because now they could be held accountable. And usually those are the ones that will, they'll have four excuses that somebody else did something that caused them to not meet your expectation.
Yeah. And something that you said all the way at the beginning of that I really keyed into and liked, going back to the super doer to supervisor. I really love that phrase. Never heard that before. That's great. But I think it is a real challenge. I know I struggled a lot when I first stepped into a management role because, again, I was used to doing a lot. And not that you do less when you're in a manager or supervisor position. You're working just as much. It's just you're working with different tasks. And so that transition from the like physical tasks into more management tasks sometimes is difficult. So a lot of times the physical stuff or some of the stuff that you did, there's a type of delegation that has to take place. Now, you're not delegating your responsibilities onto anybody else, of course, but the responsibility of delegation falls on your shoulders as a manager. And if you're a super doer, you're not used to delegating tasks. You're used to just putting your head down and doing the tasks. And so
that's exactly right.
Learning how to delegate, well, that's a whole completely separate type of challenge that you have to face when you're stepping into a management role that not everybody is really used to. And so I'd say that's probably one of the biggest challenges I've seen people face when they step into a management role when they're really, key players, is instead of asking or delegating for people to do something that's supposed to be their job, they'll just do it because to them it feels like it's easier or they can get it done faster or it'd be less time consuming if they did it. When the problem that you run into sometimes with that is if you're doing all of it, like you alluded to earlier, you get burned out because now you're doing your job and you're doing their job. And heck, it's not their fault. You're the boss. If you're doing their job for them, you're the boss. Sometimes they're going to let you and you can burn yourself out very quickly by doing that.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Coaching and teaching and leading people, it does take longer, right? It's oftentimes much quicker to just go take care of the task yourself.
Yep.
But what I've found is some of the people that I've worked with, some of the most unproductive and inefficient supervisors or leaders that I've dealt with are often the busiest.
Yeah.
Because they're chasing their tail, they're running from fire to fire, they're not in control of their own time. And some of the more unproductive or the more productive rather and efficient leaders that I've seen are the ones that are very organized and calculated. They coach their people to improve. They teach them when they need to be taught, and they just monitor their progress and just help clear the obstacles for them to continue forward. I've always kind of looked at that as the job of a supervisor or a leader at any role, at any level, is to kind of clear obstacles ahead of the folks that are coming, right? The technicians that are doing the work. So when you talked earlier about what can people do or to focus on or to help educate themselves, is to understand that your job is to make their job go smooth. And so when you can anticipate all the struggles that you had as a technician or the seasonality things that are coming, and you can get out ahead of that to help clear that path for your technicians. So by the time they get to that spot in the path, they can just keep right on moving forward. That's a big win. And you gain a lot of trust and a lot of respect from your people that report to you by operating that way.
Yeah, and you really kind of have to operate that way. I mean, again, you'll get burnout if you don't. I mean, you'll end up chasing your tail, like you said. You end up with more responsibility than you can handle, and it's a recipe for failure. And nobody wants a manager or a leader to fail. You know, nobody within the organization wants that failure. Everybody wants everybody to succeed. If you're all on the same team, you want everybody to succeed. And so, one of the worst things that you can see is somebody that's not delegating, somebody that is taking on too much work and is expending too much energy trying to do too much when they have a team available to help them.
Yeah. And you asked earlier about, what do you look for in a good leader? And I think one of the things that really separates leaders is that their willingness to build up their team as individuals or as a team and develop them. In other words, see them succeed and let them take the credit for the things that are being done rather than wanting that credit or that spotlight on yourself, right? Anytime you give that away to your team, because they're the ones that are really doing the work, right?
Yeah.
I think you gain a ton of respect from those individuals by doing that.
Yeah. Nobody wants to work hard for somebody that takes all the credit. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I agree
We've
with
all
you.
been there, I bet.
Oh yeah, I bet I agree with you 100% on that. So, we're talking a lot about mentorship, leadership, how to train people, and all of that takes communication skills, obviously. So, how do you help somebody develop those communication skills that they'll need to manage people and projects effectively? I mean, of course, we already talked about all the different personality types, so that's going to take different types of communication. So, how do you develop those skills in somebody?
It's challenging for sure. Clear and concise communication, I think, is key, and not everybody's great at doing that. But I mentioned earlier, people want clear expectations. So the clearer that you can be about your expectations for them, the more detailed, the specifics about exactly what you want from them, I think is important. But also getting them to buy in or agree to those expectations, right? Making them part of the process. It's the difference between barking out orders and forcing somebody to do something versus having a discussion and setting a common goal and then moving forward together. There's a stark difference between that. So getting people to understand why we're doing something or why they're doing what you're asking them to do, I think is probably as important as anything. People don't like to follow orders blindly. And if they do, they often don't do it to the level that you'd like them to because they really don't know why they're doing it and why it's important to do a really good job of it.
Yeah, see,
That's key.
yeah, you absolutely keyed down on such an important point there is not just clear and concise communication, but answering that why question. Here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. That is so important. People love to know why they're doing what they're doing. Nobody wants to follow blindly. Everybody wants or expects some type of explanation as to what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so if you have that communication with them, I think that's key. And I mean, really, it was kind of unfair for me to ask you that question because we've already been talking about the communication skills that you have to develop throughout this entire conversation because really communication is where it starts. You can't listen to a mentor or a leader that you admire without communication. You can't then take that information that they've given you and pass it down to the next person if you can't communicate it properly. So having those different communication skills, I mean, really, you have to have those first. That's the first thing that you have to have. If you can't listen properly, and that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't remember either, is communication's two-way. When we talk about communication, we're not talking about just you being able to tell people things. We're also talking about, as a manager, you being able to listen to things being told to you also. So that communication, your ears are just as important as your mouth. Actually, your ears oftentimes, in my opinion, are more important than your mouth when you're trying to communicate with people.
I think what you touched on, Ben, was the difference between teaching and coaching. And we try to focus on that with especially our field supervisors and leaders a lot, in that there's a subtle difference between the two. But when you teach somebody that should really be coached, you don't get great results. And knowing the difference between the two of those things is really quite important in people's development.
Yeah, and you're right, because it takes a different skill set. And oftentimes, like I was saying, you have to be able to ask the right questions of that person, whatever difficulty that they're facing. You have to be able to ask the right questions, and you have to be able to listen to what they're saying to be able to determine is this a coaching moment or is this a teaching moment? Because
Right.
sometimes it's different. Depends.
Well, and I think even understanding and recognizing when people are willing to be coached, right, is just as important as anything. So, in the heat of a moment, you've got something negative has happened, and the anxiety's high, and maybe tempers are high, and whatever critical situation. Probably not the time to be coaching people. It's time to get things done, right?
Yeah.
Solve the problem, move on to the next thing. But when the dust settles, then it's maybe time to come back and revisit that. But understanding, they may not be in the mood to hear you coach them now because they're completely frustrated with what's going on. And if you try to do that at that time, you don't get great results either. But 24 hours later, you might get a completely different response from that person.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up because timing is critical when it comes to this entire process. Cultivating people, managing people, mentoring people, being mentored, all of that depends on a person's frame of mind. And hey, sometimes we all wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Sometimes serious things do happen on the job site. Anxieties run high, tempers flare, things like that happen. And you're absolutely correct. Those are not opportune times to try to coach somebody or mentor somebody because they're not going to be in an accepting frame of mind. And you also have to recognize that in yourself as well. Hey, I'm not in the right mindset here. Maybe I need to take 10 minutes, walk over there, cool off, get myself in a much more open frame of mind, and then come back into the situation in a better mindset or a more open mindset that's going to make it easier to be able to hear what somebody's trying to tell you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I only have one question left for you, and I always ask a version of this question depending on what we're talking about from season to season. But what advice would you give to like a current manager or a current leader, somebody who wants to become a better mentor? What's some of the key advice that you would give that person if they asked you?
Good question. I think some of the things I would advise is probably go back to that earlier statement is to find a mentor. Find somebody that you hold in pretty high regard, and try to emulate them and interact with them. Ask them questions, but then also at the same time look for opportunities to be a mentor. And I'll go back to when you talk about training earlier. I was probably in training to be some type of a leader, but without even realizing it, right, for a long time. So I go way back to when you have children. If you're lucky enough to have children, you become an instant leader, right?
Yeah.
Of these young individuals. But as they grew, I had the fortunate opportunity to be involved with some of their sports teams and be a coach, and that was an eye-opening experience for me because not only did I get to deal with young adults or young children, teenagers, but I also got to deal with the parents of those teenagers. Which is oftentimes just as challenging
Yeah.
as some of the kids you were trying to coach. But not knowing those were all experiences that kind of led me to better interact with individuals. And there was some really positive experiences. There was some really negative experiences, as you might imagine. But those were all things that helped me along the path. So I guess my advice would be to look for opportunities outside of work to learn some of these soft skills. Get involved in organizations and be part of something outside of work with different personalities of people, and try to engage with that group to learn how to deal with all the different personality types that are out there. And then on the career side of it, take advantage of all the learning opportunities that are available to you. I always tell our new technicians as they go through our initial training program, you don't have to be an entomologist to be a great pest control operator or a fumigator, but it sure helps if you are.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be, right? But you have to do some of the key things really well, right? You have to come to work every day, and you have to show up on time, and you have to act like you want to be there, and you have to treat people well. But there's also things that you can learn outside of your experience in a day-to-day job. So take advantage of those opportunities, along with some of your, just a realization of how some of your real life experiences, whether it be with family or friends or other organizations, actually do relate to being a leader in your chosen career path. Combine those two things together, and I think you have a good foundation for moving forward in a leadership role.
I'm really glad that you mentioned trying to bring in some of those soft skills from other avenues or other aspects of your life, because you're absolutely right. I myself have raised two children, and you're right. You're immediately a leader when you're raising children. But one thing that I did notice is your leadership tactics, so to speak, As your child gets older, as your children get older, your leadership, your style of leadership has to change as they progress. So me being a parent to my child when they were 17, 18 years old was wildly different than it was when they were 2, 3, 4 years old. So,
and think about why that was, though, Ben. It was because at that young age, at that very young age, they were very dependent on you because, well, they couldn't do a lot of things for themselves. They didn't know any better. They didn't have the skills. So they were relying on dad to help them, right?
yeah.
And as they gain experience and as they gain education and they get older and more mature, they think they need dad less than they did, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
at the same time, you allow them to kind of experience some of the stuff on their own and make their own mistakes. And then hopefully when they do make a mistake, you get a chance to talk about it and kind of, revisit what went good, what went wrong, which might you have done differently. And it's really no different than working with people in the workplace when you become that leader, is just helping them develop and progress through those stages of their career. The people that recognize that and take advantage of that and learn from that are the folks that are successful leaders, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agree, 100%. Well, Doug, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy day to answer some questions for us about mentorship and leadership. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Ben. Thank you for asking.
A special thanks to Doug for joining us. Mentorship is one of the most powerful tools we have to ensure the long-term success of our teams and of the industry as a whole. When we invest in our people, we're not just building better leaders, we're building a stronger future. Next time on Degish America Presents, we'll be looking at crisis leadership, how strong leadership helps teams navigate emergencies and unexpected situations in the field. And if you have questions or a topic you'd like for us to cover, please email us at podcast@degishamerica.com or connect with us on our social media outlets. Until next time, I'm Ben Harrell. Thanks for listening and keep leading forward.